My name is Sherilyn Parsons. I am the founder and executive director of the Bay Area Book Festival. Thank you for coming. Thank you. And before I get into their official biographies, I just have to tell you how this panel or this conversation interview came about. I was in Jaipur, India, at the recent Jaipur Literature Festival, and there was a woman there, Mona Eltahawy, who absolutely knocked my socks off. And they put her in fact, I think they gave her the last slot at the festival because she speaks her mind, and her mind is wide-ranging and smart and bold, and they put her at the end so that the authorities wouldn't have problems with it. And I said, we're in Berkeley. We can, we can do some stuff in Berkeley. So on the spot, I invited her to come, and she very graciously accepted that opportunity. So that's why she's here. And then I heard Chinaka Hodge interview Gloria Steinem, and I thought, wow, the future of feminism is here. And yes, yes, actually both of them, the future of feminism is here. Yes, indeed. And Chinaka also mentioned later that there were some things that she sort of didn't go there in asking Gloria, and I said, you can go there now. So, so she's going to go for it. Officially, so Mona is an award-winning columnist, international public speaker on Arab and Muslim issues, and she's based in Cairo and New York City. And she has an amazing book called Headscarves to Hymens, Why the Middle East Needs a Sexual Revolution. She'll be signing out in the lobby, as will Chinaka, after the session. I think I'm going to let her tell her story instead of me giving an overview, because it's such a powerful story and it's really great to hear it from her. So let me also tell you a bit about Chinaka Hodge. She's a poet, educator, playwright, and screenwriter, and she's from West Oakland. Local, yes, West Oakland. And she has written a lot of things in a lot of places, but most recently a book called Dated MCs, which is, yes, and it's a gorgeous book, fabulous poetry, published by City Lights recently. And she also works a lot with underserved youth, is a advisor with Youth Speaks, and is now part of putting together a TV series called Minors, based on involving kids who were in foster care, from her own experience in working with kids in those situations. So, without further ado, as is said, I want to introduce to the future of feminism. Fabulous women, women of color, women who are not afraid to speak.
Sure. Yeah. All right. So I guess everyone should just prepare to have their minds blown. Let's take a moment. I don't know.
Give it to them, Chinaka.
Yeah, just wide open. So we just met backstage, yes. Which is always an awkward place to be in terms of an interview. So in the interest of asking questions that you don't hear often, and for me and the audience to get to know you best, I wanted to ask you, who are your sisters, biological or chosen, and how did you first come to see them as powerful?
I like that question.
Thank you. We did it.
Yeah. No, because, I've been promoting my book for months, and, you get asked the same questions over and over again, like, are you a lesbian, by a French male journalist? And I'm like, what? He's like, because, men are so bad. I'm like, what the fuck? Where is this interview going? So I appreciate this question, Chinaka. Well, my biological sister is a young woman called Noura, and she's 19 years younger than me. So she could have been my daughter, but I have chosen not to have children, so I'm child-free by choice. Thank you. We need to talk about those things more often and openly. And I adore Noura. She's a fantastic young woman. She's a genius. She's very powerful. She wrote 2 books before I even wrote mine. So she's definitely one of my role models and a very powerful young woman. And she's doing a PhD right now at Northwestern on military encounters between the United States and the Middle East and how they've shaped Arab American narratives It will probably be out in a book form soon, so buy my sister's book when she finishes. So that's my biological sister. But when it comes to sisterhood generally, I would say that one of the best things about promoting my book is that it's taken me around the world to countries like, obviously I promoted my book here in North America and in various Western European countries. But the most exciting places for me to go where I really discovered what I would call global feminism, or what some people call transnational feminism, was when last year I went to Nigeria and India, and earlier this year I went to Pakistan, and I just came from Johannesburg, South Africa. And I mention those countries specifically because, I did not write this book as a way of saying, oh, everything is so fantastic for white people, and my poor people, and oh my God, it's so fucked up where I come from, come rescue me, because I don't need anyone to rescue me, as you can tell. But I wrote this book because not enough of us, and this us is that global sisterhood I'm talking about, that is women of color, Muslim women, women from countries that you often don't hear from. We're so often spoken for and spoken about. So when I go to conferences, and sadly this is largely the case for book festivals, they're very white and upper middle class, and there'll be one or two panels of people of color talking for ourselves, and the rest of the festival is people talking about us. So when I went to Nigeria, when I went to India, when I went to Pakistan, when I went to South Africa, it was this kind of an exhale, it was like, fuck, finally, So whether it was a feminist circle in Nigeria talking about being feminist, being queer, LGBT issues, or it was in Pakistan, and I went out with these young feminists called, I often talk about them, they're called Girls at Dubbers. And they're my sisters because what they do is the revolution for them. And this I often compare, and I mentioned this yesterday, in the way during the civil rights movement you would get young black men and women going to lunch counters for whites only and demanding to be served as a way of breaking this incredibly unjust segregation. So that segregation exists in different forms around the world, and for women, obviously, it's public space and areas that are dominated by men. So these young women in Pakistan, I was in Lahore, but they have, the movement is in Karachi, Islamabad, Lahore, and they took me to one of these places which are roadside cafes or restaurants that they just cater to men only. And these young women would just show up and say, I want tea. Or I want to eat. And a couple of weeks ago, they got onto their bicycles and had this massive kind of ride-in because one of their biggest struggles is that fight for public space. Right. So those are my sisters. My sister is also a young woman in Lahore also who came up to me backstage. And, I used to wear a headscarf, a hijab, and she was wearing a headscarf. And sometimes young women come, and I consider them my sisters too, even though we have huge fights. And they'll say...
That's the best kind of sister.
Right? And they'll come up to me and say, why don't you think my headscarf is feminist? Which I actually don't, and we can talk about that later. And I'll say, and we'll argue. So I saw this young woman backstage in Lahore, and I was preparing for a fight. And she said, I am where you were 20 years ago. And that also is a form of sisterhood that is important in that she knows that in 20 years, this is where I am. But she recognizes that she can connect with me 20 years ago. So there's so many different kinds of sisterhoods. And there was the idea that sisterhood is global for a while in the 1970s. And Robin Morgan, who edited that book, is a good friend of mine. But I think that as women of color, we need to reclaim this word sisterhood because I think it was emptied of meaning because, again, so many people spoke about us and for us. Right. And I think because of connectivity through social media, and the way that I can connect with, I found out about Girls at Dubbers on Twitter. And then I went to Lahore and met them. So I think that sisterhood is global now is, for me, a much more powerful phrase. And I truly feel that sisterhood, especially when I can go out there and IRL them, in real life them.
I really appreciate you bringing up this concept of intergenerationality, particularly in terms of feminism and sisterhood. And I wonder who are the big sisters, what we call the OGs where I'm from, who helped birth you into your feminism. Right. You talk a bit in the book about finding texts and finding terror in yourself as you read these texts. So I wonder who you were reading, and then I'll talk to you more about the productivity of terror or fear.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I was 19, Chinaka's talking about an anecdote that I mentioned in my book. When I was 19 years old, I was a university student in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, which is often considered the quote-unquote liberal city, but there are no liberal cities in Saudi Arabia. So, it's all a matter of perspective, I guess. But I was losing my mind very quickly. I fell into a deep depression when my family moved from Saudi Arabia, from the UK to Saudi Arabia. I was born in Egypt At the age of 7, we moved to the UK, and at the age of 15, my family moved to Saudi Arabia. And I often say I became a feminist way before I discovered the word feminist. And the word I found was on the bookshelves of that library. And as I often say, there are no women's and gender studies programs in Saudi Arabia. But some renegade, and again, another sister, you know, the kind of like the hidden, invisible sister, because I didn't know her, some renegade librarian or professor put these books on the bookshelves. And interestingly enough, before I discovered the feminist text, I've got to say this, because we're going to get into fuck, sex, vagina, which is the theme of my book tour. And sex plays a big role in my book and my life, but, you know, we'll get to that in a minute. But what's that?
And mine.
Yeah, we're sisters for sure, Chinaka, and we're going to have fun today. So I found this book that I think many people even, you know, within the Muslim worlds, because there isn't one Muslim world, there are multiple Muslim worlds. And there is this amazing book that is part of this wide and long heritage of erotica in Arabic that has largely been erased and forgotten. And it's called The Perfumed Garden. And kind of the quickest and laziest way to describe this book is the Arabic Muslim Kama Sutra. And it's written by this cleric called Sheikh Muhammad Nafzawi. And he begins the book with, the way all the Quranic chapters begin, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most merciful, the most beneficent. And then he says, praise be to God, the creator of the cock and the cunt. I'm like, oh my God. This is in Saudi Arabia, okay? And I picked this book, I'm like, oh my God. No one told me about this. So there's this, you know, this book that is part of our heritage. And I mention this because I want to tie it to what you're talking about, the intergenerational aspects of feminism. Because a question I'm often asked is, well, you know, who do you have as role models there? Because, you know, you don't have feminism where you come from. Mm-hmm. And I mention in the book, not just that book, but poets, women poets from the Arab world or from the Muslim worlds in that region, who were writing very erotic, very sexually bold verses. So that was kind of like my introduction to feminism, that kind of erotica, even though back then a lot of the erotica written by men anyway was obviously centered around men. But it was like a manual where you have 100 positions for men and maybe 55 for women. So we need to, you know, adjust it a bit. And not too much given to lesbianism, much more given to men having sex with men. Again, we need to adjust it a bit. But, you know, this was 7 centuries ago. So after that, I discovered these amazing feminist journals and books written by the iconic veteran Egyptian feminist Nawal Saadawi, who's still alive, thankfully. She's still with us. She's 84. And the Moroccan feminist sociologist Fatima Mernissi, who sadly passed away a few months ago. And other women like them who, to me, were like these, they were throwing out a lifeguard, you know, saying, look, we're here. And we've been fighting these issues for decades. And for me, they really gave me, it was like grace for my mind. I honestly felt I was losing my mind. I was like, they exist. They're here. They're shoulders that I have to stand on. So they definitely exist. And there are so many other examples. So one of the things I try to do in the book is mention the names of various women activists from the Middle East and North Africa, because feminism is not something we've needed to import from over here. We've had an indigenous feminist movement since the 1920s, when an Egyptian woman called Hoda Sha'rawi removed her face veil and said this is a thing of the past. And then in the 1950s, and again, you know, this is all erased not just from a Western perspective, but internally, which really crushes my heart that we don't know our own feminist heroes. In the 1950s, as a way of fighting for the women's right to vote and to run for political office, an amazing feminist called Doreya Shafiq led 1,500 Egyptian women in storming the Egyptian parliament and staging a sit-in to demand the right to vote. And all of these stories are forgotten. And when you look at revolutionary struggles historically, women are there on the front lines, and within 2 or 3 years we're erased. And, you know, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Easter Uprising in Ireland this year. So it's not just us brown people that erase women, it's you white people too. Because in Ireland, women were on the front lines of the Irish Revolution fighting the English, and they were promised everything. And they died, and they went to jail, and in 2 years their names were erased. It's so important to revive that.
Okay, so tell us about the book. What is it? What does it aim to do? For whom is it?
Well, this book was I wrote this book to expand an essay that I wrote in 2012 called Why Did They Hate Us for Foreign Policy magazine. And that essay was the first essay I wrote with all my 10 fingers. Because for a long time, I was a journalist a long time ago, and I don't identify as a journalist anymore. I identify as a feminist author. And I've been typing with all 10 fingers since I was 18, 19. But in November 2011, Egyptian riot police beat me and broke both my arms and sexually assaulted me, and I was detained by the police and the military. But that led to both my arms being in a cast for 3 months. Wow. And to be a writer with both your arms in a cast for 3 months is to be like, you're caged, you know, you can't. The only thing I could do was to tweet, because I could use one finger on a touchpad. So I was tweeting, but I just couldn't write with my 10 fingers. So that essay was the first thing that I wrote after the cast came off. So I wrote it in a great deal of pain, because I was doing physical therapy, and a great deal of anger. And it's an anger that I embrace, because one of the questions that I get that enrages me is, this essay is really angry, and it must be angry because of what happened to you. I'm like, of course it's fucking angry because of what happened to me. What do you think? I'm like, yay, I was beaten and I was assaulted and I'm so happy. Yeah. But you know, women's anger is, again, constantly denied an expression. And you know, I embrace my anger. I always tell people, being nice and nice and polite, it gets you nothing. It's anger that gets you. And so for a lot of women, especially women of color, especially black women, don't be angry, because white people are already scared. Excuse me, white people, be scared. Because there's a lot that we're angry of, you know?
Do you have a tactic for staying present with your anger? For me, it's exactly this. I'm taught so often not to be angry, so I have my anger, I go away with it, and then I can't bring it back to shared space. So I guess that's another question in the middle of the question I just asked you.
No, and it's
how do you stay present with your anger?
I put it in my writing, and so I put it into the essay. And so the essay, of course, the essay is full of rage. And the essay was again inspired by just about 2 weeks after Hosni Mubarak, the former Egyptian dictator, was forced to step down in Egypt. The Egyptian military, which became the caretakers of our revolution, the junta, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces that I used to call the 19 Mubaraks, who took over after the one Mubarak, they sexually violated Egyptian women revolutionaries in the form of so-called virginity tests, which are basically rape. Right? In search of this elusive thing called the hymen. I'm like, fuck the hymen, fuck virginity, I'm going to destroy all of these things. And so when it happened during revolutionary times, I was like, how is this happening after a revolution? So I honestly thought, after these women who exposed the virginity tests spoke out, I thought we're going to have another revolution now, a revolution about women and women's equality. Because the revolution that went out against Mubarak was against the Mubarak in the presidential palace. I often say this. But then after the military did this, and Egyptians began to call these women liars for saying this, and you're making our honorable military look bad. It became obvious that we needed a social revolution against the Mubarak on the street corner and a sexual revolution against the Mubarak in the bedroom, because those three together form what I call the trifecta of misogyny. And together they oppress women. The state oppresses everyone, but the three of them oppress women specifically. So I was so angry that this violation of our women revolutionaries just went by unnoticed. So I wrote this essay because I thought, okay, if we're not talking about these issues in revolutionary times, when the hell do we talk about them? And I built the book out of that essay, because a lot of people accuse me of generalizing and, oh, you're just demonizing Muslim men, you're demonizing Arab men. It's not my responsibility to make any man look good. It's on you. If you go out there and rape a woman, it's on you. If you go out there and you call a woman who exposes rape a liar, again, it's on you. It's not my responsibility to make you look good. You look bad because of what you do. Right. So I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to write you a book. You think this essay was not accurate? So I got all the statistics. I did a documentary for BBC World Service Radio that took me to Tunisia and Jordan. And then through my own background in journalism, so I put this book together. And I called it Headscarves and Hymens, because I've been using this phrase for a very long time. Because I believe that Muslim women, again, from fellow Muslims and outside of the various Muslim worlds, we're constantly caught between what's on our head and what's in between our legs. We're defined by our headscarves and our hymens. And I wanted to say, as a Muslim woman who struggled with her own headscarf, I wore a headscarf for 9 years, and who struggled to get rid of this fucking hymen thing for even longer, I wanted to say I am more than my headscarf and I am more than my hymen. So I put that, and then the sexual revolution, because for me, without that sexual revolution, we're never going to dismantle that trifecta of misogyny. And for me, the sexual revolution essentially is fuck the patriarchy. And then I can describe what the sexual revolution is later.
That's my question next is, we're in Berkeley, California, and revolution is one of those words you get like in your brown sack lunch. And I'd love a working definition from you for both sexual revolution as well as political revolution, or social revolution.
Well, the political revolution was already manifest in the Middle East and North Africa many years before you began to see the Tunisians uprising and the Egyptians rising up, because, revolution revolutions don't begin in a day. And I'm glad you brought in the Berkeley context too, because I think, the word revolution has been emptied of its meaning in so many ways. You're wearing revolution on T-shirts now, like, it looks great, and you think that, yay, I'm an activist, but what does it really mean? So I'm talking about a revolution when it's a political revolution. It's like feet on the ground, rising up against fascism, against authoritarianism, and against a specific kind of a political machine that denies you dignity and freedom. And those two words, dignity and freedom, were echoed again and again in the streets of Tunisia, the streets of Egypt, Yemen, Bahrain, Syria, Libya, all the countries where you saw these revolutions. And I often remind people that in Egypt, as far back as kind of the late 1990s, when we had workers in various towns across the country where it was illegal to have a strike, they would go on strike. And that was a catalyst for the revolution. And then in 2005, we had this amazing year where activists would be staging these tiny, tiny protests. And they were amazing because they were unprecedented in front of the Interior Ministry, and that was a catalyst to the revolution. And I left New York to go and join those protests in 2005, and one thing we would hear again and again, because for the first time in my life in 2005, I took part in a protest of 100 people. That's where it was. And we marched through this huge working class neighborhood called Shobra in Cairo. And it was the middle of the day, and we were chanting down, down with Hosni Mubarak. And I always tell people that there would be busloads of people going back home from work, and they were staring at us from the bus as if we were insane. Who are these people who dare to say, down, down with Hosni Mubarak, because they're going to be disappeared any minute now. And you would hear again and again that we're breaking the barrier of fear. So this idea of breaking the barrier of fear, I think, is also essential to revolution. But when I then expand it to social and sexual revolution, I bring the trifecta of misogyny in, because we as women risked our lives going out with men. And like I said, virginity tests, they broke my arms. Many of you will remember that iconic image of the woman being dragged through Tahrir Square, and they stripped her of her hijab, of the cloak she was wearing, down to her blue bra. And to this day, sadly, we only know her as Blue Bra Girl. This woman has a name, this woman is a revolutionary, but her family has denied her the ability to speak. That is the social and sexual revolution, because they're ashamed of what happened to her. She deserves a statue built for her. Right. So I'm connecting now the breaking the barrier of fear with breaking the barrier of taboo and shame. Because for me, that's at the heart of the social and the sexual revolution. So when I define especially the sexual revolution, because I think that's going to tie the Mubarak on the street corner and the Mubarak in the bedroom, the definition of the sexual revolution begins with the declaration, I own my body. And when you declare, I own my body, it means that when I fight street sexual harassment, where the Mubarak on the street corner lives, or when I fight campus sexual assault, as you have here in this country, where 25% of women on campus face sexual assault, to no consequence, hardly anyone is held accountable. And you all have heard of the Stanford swimmer case where he raped that woman and he got 6 months because the judge didn't want to ruin his life. So when you fight that with the declaration, I own my body, that is the sexual revolution. When I declare I own my body and I fight female genital mutilation, by which girls as young, usually from the age of 5 to 9, have completely healthy parts of their genitals cut in the name of controlling their sexuality, fighting female genital mutilation is a revolutionary act. But ultimately, fighting marital rape, fighting domestic violence, fighting all of that as a way of overthrowing the Mubarak in the bedroom and on the street corner. But ultimately, when I declare as a Muslim woman who waited until she was 29 because I was brought up with abstinence to have sex, and then I often say I've been making up for lost time, and in case anyone out there is feeling sorry for me, I fucked the sex out of my system and I'm totally fine. Fuck the guilt out of my system and I'm totally fine. But I share this story because there are so many other young Muslim women who are not fine and who are held back by the barriers of taboo and shame. So when I declare I own my body, it means ultimately that it is my right to have sex with whomever, with their consent, whenever, a man or a woman. And in doing that, I dismantle this idea of virginity and a hymen, because what does virginity mean unless there's a penis and a vagina involved? Yeah. What does virginity mean when it's two men having sex? What does virginity mean when it's two women having sex? What does virginity mean if I choose to have sex with a woman and then next week with a man? So that for me is what the sexual revolution is. And it's especially important for me to share my own stories, because this is not a memoir, as you know. But I talk about why it was easier, even though it took me 9 years to take off my headscarf, than to shed, quote unquote, my hymen. because it's so difficult to talk about sex, especially as a Muslim woman. And I cannot expect other Muslim women to break that barrier of taboo and shame unless I offer my way of how I broke my barrier of taboo and shame. So that's what so that for me is the working definition, that I own my body.
My good friend and a wonderful activist and thinker scholar here, Sonia Renee Taylor, runs an organization. You guys know her? The Body Is Not an Apology. Wonderful organization. You should check it out. She posed a question to our circle recently and asked, who benefits from your body's shame? So that's my question for you. Who benefits from this cycle of terror and shame about sex, particularly for women or women in the Muslim or Arab world?
Yeah, well, a patriarchy, absolutely. And one of the things that gives me the most hope is all these young activists, some of whom I mention in my book, but some of whom I mention in my writing because I write this column for the New York Times, and I'm trying to share all these names like Girls at Tabas and the activists that I meet in South Africa and in Nigeria, all of that. So in Johannesburg last week, one of the things that I did was I met with young people who belong, they're university students there who belong to the decolonization movement and also a movement called Fees Must Fall. And they identify themselves as the fallists. From that phrase, fees must fall. And online, on Twitter, they hashtag fees must fall. Within that movement, and again, this is where patriarchy comes in now. Within that movement, there are amazing, amazing kick-ass men who are revolutionaries and activists. But here's a common misconception. People think that just because a man is an activist, he's a feminist. It's not true. He's an activist. That's it. So unless you prove to me that you're a feminist and you are actively fighting misogyny, I'm not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. And that, sadly, South Africa has a huge problem with sexual violence. I mean, it exists everywhere, obviously, but it's an especially acute problem in South Africa. And so the feminists in the Fees Must Fall and the decolonized movement in South Africa wanted to start talking about campus rape and campus sexual assault, and they were not being given the space to talk because guess what? Men dominate all conversations, shock, horror, and they were not given the support, And so one of them is a wonderful young writer called Panache, and I'm so jet lagged I forgot her family name, but she wrote this great book called Sweet Medicine, and she's one of the fallist activists. And we had this great panel in which she was saying, look, black women go out for everyone, but no one comes out for black women. And so in that Fees Must Fall movement, black women were saying, look, we need to start talking about how, yes, we're fighting against the fees in university, but we must also fight at the same time intersectionality, the sexual violence against women, and the guys were just not showing up. Right. So the women started their own movement now, and it was when the university administration was not paying attention to their complaints, they began to post on Facebook the names of men who had raped them and sexually assaulted them. And they would have regular protests on university campuses, many campuses, but one in particular is called, it's called Wits University. And the women there had 3 weeks of constant protests against sexual violence, sometimes using traditional protests of nudity, because these are indigenous to the various tribal backgrounds in South Africa. And it was so massive that they actually suspended classes. Now, can you imagine a movement of feminists that are fighting sexual violence so vociferously and actively that the university suspends classes? I wish we could see this in this country. So who benefits? It's patriarchy that benefits. It's patriarchy that benefits because then it begins to dictate what we can talk about, what we can protest, and who we can hold accountable to those things. And another group that also gives me great hope is, other than the young women fighting FGM who are themselves survivors, and I have many British Somali friends who are in kind of this new emerging feminist movement who are also considered sisters. One of them is a great young woman called Layla Hussein, and she's a therapist, and she's opened a counselling centre in the UK for women who survive FGM. But there's a group of young men in Kenya called Men Against FGM, and they're fighting FGM because obviously it's not women doing it for women because we want to control each other's sexuality. When we police each other, we're policing each other for patriarchy. And if we police each other thinking we're going to be protected, it's false, it's a delusion. Nothing will protect you against patriarchy. So these men in Kenya now are saying, okay, why is FGM performed? It's performed for men. Why? It controls women's sexuality to keep her a virgin, brackets for men. It controls women's sexuality so that her dowry bride is high, brackets for men. It controls women's sexuality to keep her chaste in marriage, brackets for men. So when we begin, instead of asking why do women do this to each other, and we start asking why do men demand this of women, that's when we begin to put the focus and the onus where it belongs, which is on patriarchy, which is why I say fuck the patriarchy.
That's real talk. You can clap. I know there have been a few moments where we wanted to release like affirmation. It's very hard in Berkeley when you can't say ashe, so you can just l'chaim with whatever you need. It's just so I would like you to talk about the dynamic of sharing family business or in-group business with the rest of the world, about airing dirty laundry. How do you maintain? How do you maintain?
It is one of the hardest things. Yeah. And like the chapter 6 in my book is like the chapter on sex. And ironically enough, I wrote it on my parents' dining room table.
Oh, writers.
And I'm sitting there writing and going, fuck, if they ever read this, oh my God. And I had to sit there going, okay, like, how's my mum going to feel about this sentence? And you know, and by way of explaining, like, you know, my own family's dynamic, I will share the journey that we've had. So at the end of 2010, I wrote this essay, and at the time I thought it was very throwaway because I was late. I'm always late on my deadlines. I was like, what should I write? Right? Yeah, I'm sure you know.
I'm never late on a deadline.
Oh, God.
I'm late at the moment.
Always late. And so I thought, you know what, let's write about this, I think I called it the Me Monologues, and about how I once taught in Oklahoma, and I always say that Oklahoma is like the Middle East because it's so conservative, and men and religion and all of this, and connecting the purity culture of, you know, those states in which young women sign pledges to their fathers that promise that I'm not going to have intercourse until I get married, and, you know, so virginity is not just over there, it's over here. With, you know, my own fight to overcome the abstinence that I was taught. And one line in this essay is, so I was taught that I should wait until I get married to have sex, but I got fed up waiting, and I couldn't find anyone to get married to, so I had sex before I got married. That's it. I didn't think twice about it. And then the essay came out, and I get this phone call from my sister, and she's like, what the fuck have you done? I'm like, what? What have I done? She goes, I have never seen Dad so upset. I'm like, what? And she goes, your essay. I was like, are you kidding me? First of all, where I come from, it's don't ask, don't tell. Yeah. Everybody knows you're having sex. Everybody knows what you're doing. We just don't talk about it. Right. So I talked about it. This one line was telling. And for 4 months, and the next 4 months now, so during the 18 days of the Egyptian Revolution, where I lived here, at the time I couldn't afford to buy a ticket to go back, so I had to do my revolution in this country. So I basically lived in TV studios talking about the revolution. So during all of that, when I'm like, yay, revolution, and for another 3 months, my parents and my brother were not talking to me. The only person in my family who was talking to me was my sister. So I was like, wow, this is my revolution, right? Where all of this is happening, and it's all this family dynamics and drama. And then my parents went back to Egypt for vacation, and they called me to tell me, but we never ever discussed this essay again, which is exactly what this don't ask, don't tell thing is, as if it never happened. And then fast forward to November of 2011 when I was assaulted. And I was taken by the police and then handed over to the military intelligence. So I effectively dropped out of Twitter, where I live, basically, for about 16 hours. So I'm sure that my family thought I was dead. The only thing, I was able to tweet during my detention with the police that I had been taken in, and thankfully a big global campaign was launched to release me, but I disappeared. So I think in those hours when I disappeared, and then after I came out and I had surgery on my arm and all of this, something happened in my family where I think my parents and my brother realized that this is it, you know, it was a before and after moment. And this is what Mona does. And she's alive. They broke her arms, they sexually assaulted her, and it was all stuff that I know each of them has handled differently. But for me, the before and after was, okay, I could have died. And there were 12 other women who were assaulted in almost the same way as I was, but they've not been able to speak, again, because of family dynamics and shame. And for me, it was like, fuck it, you know, Audre Lorde said, your silence will not protect you. I'm like, okay, I could have died, and all of this that I wanted to say will go unsaid. So for me, it was like, okay, the end of shame. And now, fast forward to this book, where I was having dinner with my parents. I was in Evanston last week with my parents and my sister and her husband. And my mom says to me, so there's this Facebook page that says that your book is a conspiracy by the Egyptian military to ruin the morals of good Muslims. I'm like, really? The fascist dictator called Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who was the head of military intelligence, who interrogated me blindfold while my arms were broken and I had been sexually assaulted, are using me? Well, you know, and I'm often called a spy for America and a spy for Mossad, whatever. So we were laughing, and my mom's sitting there laughing and laughing. And I was like, wow, you know, we've really come far during those 4 years. Because when my book came out, and before I went to promote it, I said to them, look, we have to talk about my book. And I said to them, you don't have to read this book, but I want you to know that I didn't write this book to hurt you. Right. And I didn't write this book to embarrass you or anything. I wrote this book because it's my revolution. And you don't have to read it, especially chapter 6. And my mom goes, I'm going to read every single word of this book to see what my crazy daughter has done. Right. And she goes, the title alone, oh my God, you're always talking about sex, sex, sex. Why are you always talking about sex? And then my dad says, look, we love you as well. We love you very much, and we're very proud of you. We might not agree with everything you say, but we love you. So it's been really, really difficult, because and it's not just where I come from. I think for anyone to see their daughter, right, or son even, write openly about sex and talk openly about sex is going to be difficult. But where my parents come from is an even more conservative place than say, here in Berkeley, right? Because my parents were raised in a country where you don't talk about sex. My parents were raised in a generation where you are expected to wait. And I know both my parents waited until they got married, and I'm sure my parents have had sex with no one else except each other, and they're about to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. And so that's where they come from. So the work that I've had to do is say, okay, look, they are a product of their time and culture, and I understand where they come from. But it's that generational thing again now, where we're going through these revolutionary times in Egypt, and there are younger people than me in Egypt who need to see older people who have what I call the privilege of speaking. And, I hate this phrase, giving a voice to the voiceless, because no one is voiceless. Right. Everyone has a voice. And if you don't hear that voice, you have to ask why. It's because they're marginalized or they're just not given this platform. So I consider myself, having gone through this fight, to be incredibly privileged. My privilege saved my life when I was taken and beaten. And even though I was sexually assaulted, I'm alive because I do have a platform. Had I been a regular working-class Egyptian woman, I would probably have been killed or gang-raped. So I have this platform, which is a privilege, and I believe that people who have privilege are obliged to fight 10 times harder than those who don't, to make this platform bigger for the others. And so I hope, and I hear from younger women, and not just in Egypt, but in many different contexts. I got an email today from a young woman here in Berkeley. I hope that in reading what I share and in being so honest about this stuff, someone out there like 19-year-old me who encountered Nawal Saadawi and Fatma Mernissi is then encouraged to think of this platform as belonging to her as well, and that she also has a space on this platform. And in seeing my own family dynamics, to know that whether she's queer, whether she's gender non-conforming, whatever the challenge is to her specific context, it doesn't have to be she comes from a conservative culture where she's not supposed to have sex. There are many challenges. I hope someone out there reads my book and thinks, well, look how far Mona came. This stage is big enough for more than just her.
In the book, you talk about your first trip to Mecca and being at the Kaaba and being assaulted there, and your desire to keep that story inside and not speak it. What was the turning point, if any, that encouraged you to share that story, both with yourself, then with your family, then with others, and then to move forward to tell all of these stories? Yeah. Well, the anecdote that Chinaka's talking about was when my family, soon after my family moved from the UK to Saudi Arabia, we went on pilgrimage, the Hajj, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And it was the first time in my life where I went out in public, because when you pray, you're often dressed like this, or even though I stopped wearing the veil when I prayed, because that's another story. Anyway, at the time, to go to Mecca on Hajj, every part of my body was covered except for my hands and face. And I looked like a nun, and I'd just come from Catholic school in Glasgow, Scotland. And here I am in Saudi Arabia, and I looked like a nun, but I was dressed in white. And part of the rituals of the pilgrimage is that cubicle structure called the Kaaba, towards which Muslims pray 5 times a day, and it's the holiest place for Muslims. You circulate around the Kaaba 7 times as part of the ritual to honor Abraham and to make that connection between Abraham and the Abrahamic faiths, because it's described, the Kaaba is described as the house of God built by Abraham, and Muslims revere Abraham as a prophet of God. So we're going round and round, and during Hajj you have up to 2 million people in Mecca. And we're making these circulations around the Kaaba, which is called tawaf in Arabic. And I feel a hand on my ass. I'm like, there's no way this is happening. This is, every Muslim home almost has a picture of the Kaaba. It's, a revered place. So at first I thought I was imagining it. But this bastard was determined.
And he kept his hand on my ass for several minutes, and I kept trying to wiggle away, but it's so crowded. And in the end, I just burst into tears because I felt so violated, but I had no words to say what was happening to me because I could put my hand out and I could feel the Kaaba. And then my parents were like, what's wrong, what's wrong? And they said, oh, it's so crowded. I made up some bullshit excuse about the crowds. And so we tried to move to a place that was emptier. And soon after, we went to perform another ritual of the Hajj, which is you embrace this thing called the Black Stone. And it's like an apocryphal story, but it's supposed to have been a rock from heaven or paradise that was given to humanity, and it's turned black because of humanity's sins. You know, whatever the origin, part of the rituals is you embrace the stone. And there's a Saudi policeman there who makes room for women and makes men stand to one side so women can embrace it in the safety of, you know, a women's only line. And this Saudi policeman gropes my breast as I'm doing this. And at this point, I'm ready to split like this into a million pieces. And I just, again, as I said, I had no words for this. I could not understand why, first of all, a fellow pilgrim would be assaulting me and why a policeman would be assaulting me when I'm dressed in the way that they, you know, like a good Muslim girl should be dressed. This is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. It's the holiest site for Muslims. It totally fucked my mind up for so many years, and it took me a really, really long time to unpack how that was one of the reasons that I decided to wear hijab. Because outside of that particular context of pilgrimage in the ordinary day-to-day life, I felt like I was being raped by men on a regular basis, by their eyes, by their hands, by their constant attempt to get at my body. And I think that this is an experience that connects girls around the world. Yeah. Because I often share a story by an American friend of mine, when I told her this story, told me, and I said this yesterday at the panel, told me that almost at the same time, because we're about the same age, she went to Italy, and she was constantly assaulted by Italian men, like bum pinching, which is a euphemism for sexual assault. And so she goes back to America, and I am in Saudi Arabia, and I decide to wear the hijab as an attempt to hide from men. And she decides to start wearing baggy clothes as an attempt to hide from men. And it's really important to make those connections because again, we have to ask the question, what are these girls hiding from? And it is men. Yeah. And instead of us hiding, we have to start asking men and boys why they are doing this to us and why they're not stopping this and why the onus is on us. So I could not tell anyone the story at the Hajj for years, and I felt so violated and I felt so ashamed. I have done nothing to be ashamed of. The shame is on the men, but the shame is always given to us because we don't talk about this stuff.
And the shame is iterative, so it's not just when you speak it aloud, it's when you're touched in a certain way or winked at or eye groped. Or
what did I do to make him do this? And the question should be, why is he doing this and why is he such a fucking bastard? Yeah. Behave yourself. So when I finally started to share this story, I think the first time I shared it was this lunch for women and their daughters at the university that I went to. And people were shocked. And this one Egyptian woman came up to me afterwards and she said, you know, you really shouldn't share this story because it's really going to make Muslims look bad. A woman policing another woman about her own experience of how often does this happen? Instead of saying, oh my God, we have to start exposing this because... But the flip side of that story is, the more I began to share this story, the more women would say to me, oh my God, the exact same thing happened to me. Yes. So we have to break those barriers of taboo and shame. So I had to share that story because it was so integral to my experience of hijab. And again, I get called a liar, you're trying to make Muslims look bad. It's not on me, it's on you. But because I've been saying it and I've insisted not to be silent about it anymore, more and more women share it. And I was able finally to tell my parents about 10 or 15 years afterwards. I said, remember when I started to cry and, you know, all that. And they told me, you should have told us and we would have found the guy and taken him to the police. But, you know, I get that told too. You know, a mother came to my reading in New York and her daughter told her when I was 10 and we were at that concert together, this guy sexually assaulted me right there. And her mother was like, why didn't you tell me? And I told her mother, look, I know where she's at because you don't have the words for it, you know?
And even the language of asking, why didn't you, 10 years, 20 years down the road, it puts the onus on you as opposed to the assailant. So.
Exactly, because sometimes you need time and power. We need power to speak. You know, the act of speaking is an inherently powerful thing. And when you're 10 or when you're 15, and I'd never been touched that way before, with or without consent, I didn't have either the power or the words for it. It was awful. So, you know, it's this breaking the barrier of taboo and shame is so incredible. And because of that, and because of my own sexual assault, during the revolution. And because I know that so many other women have been assaulted, I'm especially insistent on talking about sex as a good and pleasurable thing.
Yes.
Because I think when we do finally find the words to talk about our assault, the last thing I want to do is talk about sex and violence as if they're constantly intertwined. I want to say, yeah, you know what? I have been sexually assaulted several times. I often say, if you could put paint on the parts of my body where I'd been touched without my consent, my entire body would be in color, in paint. Yeah. And that is real and that is significant. But we also need, as women, to take over sex as a pleasurable thing. Also, again, for young women, so that they know that there is life after sexual violence, that there is life with sexual violence, and this is something that will never leave me. I will always be someone who's survived this and always someone who's struggling with it, but there is also space in my life, as there will be for you, to have good sex with a woman, with a man, with whoever you choose, and enjoy that, and be that part of your experience. So I talk about the violence and I talk about the violation, but I talk about the desire and the pleasure. And I say I have earned my desire and I have earned my pleasure, as can you. That's so important.
I love that. Will you speak to how your scholarship and your critique of Islam has drawn you closer to your faith?
Yeah, absolutely. When I talked earlier about praying without a headscarf, and again, more sisters to share, one of my biggest heroes is an African-American scholar of Islam called Amina Wadud. So other than those women I discovered in Saudi Arabia who took a more secular approach to Islam, I don't identify as an Islamic feminist. I identify as a secular Muslim and a feminist. But I don't use kind of a religious interpretation or feminist interpretation, rather, to justify my ability to function as an equal human being. Right. But those interpretations do exist. And one of the pioneers of Islamic feminism is Amina Wadud, who's actually from the Bay Area, but sadly she's in Kuala Lumpur now. And she was like, oh my God, you're in my area and I'm in Kuala Lumpur. And Kuala Lumpur is central to this because in Kuala Lumpur, Amina was involved with Malaysian women about 2 decades ago in launching a movement, a feminist movement called Sisters in Islam. And as kind of a godchild of that movement, a movement that I belong to was launched in Kuala Lumpur in 2009 called Musawa, which is the Arabic word for equality. And Musawa is the movement for equality and justice in the Muslim family. And they take the feminist interpretation of Islam, the secular feminism of Muslim women, and the constitutions of various Muslim countries, as well as the laws of those countries, and they use a combination of all of them to fight things like child marriage, polygamy, female genital mutilation, all of those things. And Amina Wadud is particularly important in my life, not just because of her work doing that, but in 2005, she was the imam, the woman imam, in the first public mixed gender Friday prayer. So this is a woman leading men and women praying together, because there are instances where a woman leads women. But the whole point of Amina Wadud claiming for herself the power of imam is like ordination for Catholic women to become priests, or the struggle of Jewish women. And I know in the Reconstructionist and rabbinical and conservative denominations, they can be rabbis. In the Orthodox, they can't. They have other positions. So in 2005 in New York City, Amina Wadud was our imam. And there were 100 of us, and it was one of the most moving moments in my life. It was 50 women and 50 men being led by Amina Wadud in a Friday prayer. And I was one of 2 women who prayed without a headscarf. I prayed next to a man, and I prayed on my period. So anyone out there who understands Islam knows this is a triple whammy. And this is how revolutions begin, with all these whammies. So the impact of that prayer alone, just to give you an example of what a revolution it was that Amina Wadud started. The Arab League was meeting in an emergency summit. I often joke they had an emergency summit because of what we did, but it was something else. And Gaddafi, who has thankfully long since departed our world, Gaddafi got up and actually said what they did in New York, which is a woman leading 50 men and 50 women in prayer, what they did will create 1 million bin Ladens. Muqtada Sadr, who was this often called the firebrand Shia cleric in Iraq, was interviewed by the BBC for a documentary on the Shia in Iraq. And he was asked by a producer, and the producer shared this anecdote with me. What's the worst thing America has done? Now, you would think this man would say, destroy my country, many times over. Yeah. But no, the worst thing that America has done, according to this Iraqi cleric, is to allow a woman to lead prayer. Wow. Look at the power of women owning this. And Amina Wadud at the time used to teach at the University of Virginia. And she got death threats, and it became so bad that the university told her, please stay at home because we cannot guarantee your safety. But now, Amina Wadud has gone around various countries around the world, the UK, and there's a movement in North America of women leading prayer. And I've been asked to lead prayer in Canada. I haven't done it yet, but maybe one of these days I will. So because of what Amina Wadud did, it was part of my own personal revolution. There's also an openly gay imam called Imam Daya Abdallah. And he has opened a mosque in Washington, D.C. that has been replicated in other countries such as South Africa and in Australia, in which openly gay Muslim clerics, whether they are women who have claimed the imamship for themselves or men who have been given certificates of imams, because we don't give them to women yet. But Imam Daya Abdallah was actually studying at kind of an imam university in Virginia. And they wouldn't give him his certificate because they found out he was gay. Wow. So that's another revolution in and of itself. But he's opened a mosque in Washington, D.C. that is open to everyone. So LGBTQ Muslims, women can lead prayer there. It's a welcoming space to everyone. And I've been hearing about, as I said, these mosques in Australia. And there are openly queer Muslim movements in the UK called Iman, in Canada, in the United States. And one of my best friends, a woman from LA called Arnie Sonnenfeld, who is a singer and an activist, has launched a movement in many parts of the world now called Muslims for Progressive Values. And they focus specifically on feminism. Arnie. They focus specifically on feminism and LGBTQ rights. And they have open branches all over the world, in North America, Europe, Australia, because of these queer, welcome, friendly mosques. And she's about to open a branch in Tunisia, and I think in Nigeria and Kenya as well. All of those people, when I'm asked, why are you still a Muslim? Because people say, why don't you just leave this religion and leave? I say, first of all, it is my right to remain in this religion like this. Because just as my mother wears hijab and my sister wears hijab, I've struggled for 9 years to take mine off. I want you, when you see the red hair and the tattoos and this woman saying fuck sex vagina all the time, to know that this too is a Muslim. And I want you to know that this too is a Muslim thanks to all of these amazing activists who have, like I said, I'm trying to make this stage bigger. They have made my place in Islam bigger. And so now, and I said this yesterday, when it comes to things like Muslim women and the headscarf, and is it feminist or not, or queer Muslim issues, my message to all of you is, because of all these amazing activists and the work that we do, if you are white and if you're a non-Muslim woman, shut up and listen to Muslim women. When it comes to the hijab, shut up and listen to Muslims when we fight about being queer and our ability to exist everywhere. And understand that when I insist on remaining in Islam, it is because I am demanding that that stage called Islam is big enough for all of us. And that's so important. And all those people that I mentioned are making it bigger for the rest of us and have made my Islam a much more livable Islam.
Amen. Amen. So we have time for one more of my questions, and then we're going to open it up to you all for about 15 minutes of Q&A. So have a good question ready. Okay. My last question to you has to do with the power of words spoken, because I think that's where you and I cross paths. I read the book, and then I put on the book on tape, and I have to tell you the book on tape was transcendent, or audiobook. We don't do things on tape anymore. There's no cassettes left. But
I narrated that.
It's your own voice, so that's what I was going to say. This morning, I put my alarm to be a chapter to wake me, and then I sat in my room and listened to your voice. That's sort of my own call to prayer this morning. So I appreciate that, but my question for you is, what does it mean for you to speak these words as opposed to have written them, and what is the power and danger for you to speak them aloud?
Well, it was really important for me to read the book because I think it's important for authors to read their books anyway. It was also important because, my mother tongue was Arabic. I speak English more now because we went to London when I was 7. But there are all these Arabic names that are really important for me to pronounce the way that they should be pronounced. My name in Arabic is Mona Eltahawy. How many people can say Mona Eltahawy? So anyone whose name is not English, you know the struggle. That I've been called Eltahaway, Eltahaway, and I don't know what.
My name is Chinaka, bruh.
My
whole life, yes.
Right? So our names, they're important. But words are also important because we have to say, so right now in the United States of America, it is really important for me to say that we have a fascist, bigoted, misogynist, homophobic fuck called Donald Trump running for president. And the power of words, of saying that, saying that this country is going through a period of fascism that is allowing racists and misogynists and bigots to come out and unashamedly use words that they, for a long time, were only whispering to themselves. This country is using religion and politics to police women's bodies in ways that I talk about in this book. But people here go, oh my God, but it's so much worse over there. You're lucky you live in America, where the Christian Brotherhood, very much like the Muslim Brotherhood I fight over there, they have to be connected. Because the Muslim Brotherhood and the Christian Brotherhood, they're all obsessed with my vagina. And my message to them is, stay out of my vagina unless I want you in there. All of those words are important.
Yes.
But over here, the default is, but come on, you're free. Thank God you live in America. It's not as bad as over there. It is shit over here right now. These elections coming up are a disaster. I cannot believe that this fascist fuck Trump is running. I have huge problems with the Clintons generally. I have huge problems with the racist, misogynist men of the left who support Bernie Sanders. Who the fuck am I going to vote for?
You're the first person to say what I think inside, what I've been saying.
Who am I going to vote for, Chinaka?
And beyond this, no one has asked me for my vote. No one. I've asked a Bernie supporter to ask me for my vote. I've asked a Hillary supporter to ask me for my vote. No one will ask me.
See?
I'm voting for you.
Chinaka, we're going to run for president, dude.
Okay, so you all have questions now. I know you do. We have them floater mics, and they're. Okay, so they're gonna meet. You go meet them. You go meet the people with the microphone, and then you ask the question. While they're walking there, can I ask the question everyone's been asking, like thinking since we both walked on stage?
Sure.
What do you use in your hair?
What do you use in yours? I love yours.
I have Curlbox. Do you know Curlbox?
Oh, no, I don't.
They're a black-owned company out of Atlanta, Georgia. 2 black women who sell like full-size products. Because you know Birchbox, like they sell like little tiny-ass samples. They sell like enough for black women's hair. And it comes once a month. Yeah, exactly. For like $25 a month. Like a lot.
Curlbox. I'm going on there.
There it is.
Well, for color, it's Pravana. Okay. And for curls, it's Redken.
Very nice.
Yeah, anytime.
Thank you for segueing to my
it's
question.
It's such an important question.
No, it's a real question.
I'm coming to you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why, though. But, you know, do you remember when Chimamanda and Zadie had that amazing discussion on fashion? So Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and Zadie Smith. Okay, 2 amazing black women writers on a stage in New York, and in the middle of their conversation about writing, the conversation went to fashion.
But they had to.
Right?
These 2 women?
Oh, the 2 of them together, right?
Right.
But see, here's the thing. When I was a younger feminist, I used to fight, dressing up. But I'm like, I live it. fashion is so important. Yeah. I love what you're wearing. I love what I'm wearing. And I'm going to go buy Curlbox.
Oh, hey, here we are. There it is. It's something we don't really have time to get into today, but, beyond the politics of hijab, I think black women have the same sort of politics about covering their hair or not, or what's in our hair, how we choose to wear it or straighten or show it. So another conversation next year. They'll bring us back.
All right.
It's a conversation we're going to have now, because that's exactly my question. I wanted to invoke last year. I went to a conference hosted by New Voices for Reproductive Justice, whoop, whoop, New Voices, and in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and they hosted a conference called Kinks, Locks, and Twists, Health, Beauty, and the Environment, because that is the point. The way black women wear their hair and work with their hair, these have repercussions. I also have kinky hair, and as an Indian woman who went to that conference, I felt absolutely at peace with myself, with my presence, with my body, with my hair, for the first time in my life with black women. And so I want to give a shout out to that, and my question is about that. It's about women of color in revolution with each other, and about solidarity in that revolution, and across communities, across cultures, across countries, and even across continents. What does it mean to both of you, Mona and Chinaka, and especially you, Chinaka, to be in this conversation together with each other today?
Chinaka, you go first. I talked so much.
You talked a lot, but I felt as if my voice was being heard, so I think that's the best way to describe how I feel. I get asked to interview a fair share of people, and since the Gloria Steinem interview, everyone who's written a book on anything feminism, I've been asked to ask something of, and this is the first time I feel heard, or responded, or reflected, or provoked or challenged. So I'm just very honored to be at the table, and very honored to be part of a cadre of women who aren't afraid to write the truth. And for it's true. And for me, as a survivor of rape and sexual assault, as someone who has been in space where religious zealots made me unsafe, I'm thankful to you for your work.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. It's been... Thank you. And thank you for your question. And I think, and you know, and this is why I talked about the amazing activists I met in India, Pakistan, Nigeria, South Africa. Oh, you sat down, sorry. Hello. Hi, you're there. It's so important because, you know, Whose Lives Matter, right, at a time of Black Lives Matter, launched by 3 queer black women, making all of the space within that movement also for Say Her Name, at a time in this country where people of color stories are erased, women of color are doubly erased because intersectionality applies not just to feminism, but intersectionality also applies to the bigots and the misogynists and the homophobes. They also have an intersectionality, right? At which, again, it's women of color who end up suffering the most because we fight so many isms. It's so fucking exhausting. And that's why we talk about, you know, white feminism, not as a way to fight individual white women. I have nothing against individual white women. I'm talking about a kind of feminism that has the privilege of fighting just misogyny. I don't have that privilege. I fight misogyny, homophobia, racism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, classism, ableism, all of that. And so that's why when I go to India, I will meet with amazing feminist revolutionary publisher Urvashi Butaili, who she opened the first feminist publishing house in India called Kali Press. And she now has a publishing house, feminist again, called Zuban Press, that also publishes many titles on LGBTQ issues in India, as well as, you know, the traditional feminist titles. So all of those women are incredibly important for me because they understand all of those isms. And there can be no revolution without that kind of understanding that women of color are... I'm happy to be alive right now because Twitter exists, not because I'm thankful to the corporation that is behind Twitter, but because through Twitter I can contact Zuban Press, I can be in touch with Girls at Darbas, and I can be in touch with Panache in South Africa. And all of that connectivity reminds me that we are global, and we are there, and we have a voice, and they will not silence us anymore, and they will not talk for us or about us anymore. And when it comes specifically now to black women, my feminism is inherently and absolutely held up by black feminism, whether it's Bell Hooks, whether it's Audre Lorde, whether it's all of those amazing black, Patricia Hill Nelson, what's the name of that amazing, thank you, Patricia Hill Collins, thank you. All of these amazing black feminists who said all of this, who said that we're fighting all of these isms. And men of our community are telling us to shut up because we're making them look bad and all of the racism. And, you know, the fuckers on the right wing are saying, you see, even the women are saying the men are that bad. So it is black feminism that helped me understand that I'm telling the right wing and the racists to fuck off and the men in my community who insist on being misogynist to fuck off. So I owe the black feminism a huge debt.
Mona, do you identify as a black feminist?
What's that?
Do you identify as a black feminist?
Do I identify? Well, you know, here's the thing. I know when, for example, Lemonade came out.
I was going to ask you about Lemonade. I swear it's on here. I swear. Go ahead.
We could have talked for hours.
A long time, yes.
Okay, look, well, I knew when Lemonade came out. You know, I watched it and it was very powerful and I just tweeted one tweet, right? But I understood that this is a specifically, absolutely conversation for black women. So I stood back in the same way that I say, if you're white and a non-Muslim woman, shut up and listen to Muslim women. So I shut up and I'm listening and I'm learning. And I also, I politically identify as black, absolutely. So as a black, yeah, I do identify as a black feminist. But I wanted to make those kind of finesse it a bit because I would never, ever interfere or butt in when black feminists are talking specifically about issues like Lemonade. So politically, I'm black. But when it comes to feminism, I would say like I'm probably more brown and many bits black, but I will definitely shut up and listen when it's a conversation that black feminists own, you know?
Yes. We're going to be friends. I'm going to get your number after this.
So as another Indian feminist who came to this country a few years ago, I just want to say how affirming it is to see the two of you on stage together. Because with all due respect and solidarity to Sherilyn, this is the past and present of feminism, not just the future. And my question to you is this. Both of you, in many different ways, are so powerful around words. And you talked about the shut up and listen phenomenon, which I think is very important. And one of the spaces that is key right now to shut up and listen is the internet. So even as it has emancipatory potential, there is also the narrative around the representation of voices that are not amplified. Women, people of color. I work on Wikipedia. 1 in 10 Wikipedians is self-identified female. 20% of the world writes about 80% of the world.
Yeah.
What do both of you feel around how we make sure that people of color, marginalized voices, are heard and that others can shut up and listen?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, it's a very, very quick and simple answer. I think, again, those of us who have the stage, those of us who have a platform, owe it to those who don't to amplify their voices. So I think if you do have a presence online, amplify the voices of those who don't have a lot of followers, who you know. And when you see a woman of color or someone queer or someone who you know doesn't have a lot of power online being attacked, go on there and defend them. Go on there and use your power and use your visibility and stage and platform to amplify them and uphold them and let them know that they have your love and solidarity. That's my answer. Chinaka.
For the last 20 years, I've worked with an organization called Youth Speaks and the Living Word Project based here in the Bay Area. We have partners in 42 cities nationally and 6 or 7 internationally in any given year. Our goal is to bring young writers from the margin to the core and speak truth to power. We've amplified over the last 15 years upwards of 100,000 voices. So that's my life's work. I feel you. That's what I do.
Hi, so I have spent a lot of time in the nonprofit space. I founded an organization that helps LGBT folks out of tough situations in the Middle East. Worked with Anya Zoneveld, she is amazing. So my question is about, in the nonprofit space, there are so many really well-intentioned orgs based in Europe and the United States that have, in the language of their mission, this idea of rescuing and saving folks that a lot of people find really problematic, including myself. So, as well-intentioned as they are, I'm wondering, do you see that as responsible? And how do you see as the most responsible way to reach out and lend a hand to these oppressed groups without taking away their agency?
Yes, thank you for that question. I'm often asked, I'm so glad no one has asked this yet, how can I help the women in Egypt? I'm like, don't.
Stop asking that question.
Help the women right here, but I'm going to expand the discussion to LGBTQ issues. There are movements in the Middle East that I think a lot of people don't know exist. And obviously I would love to see many more movements. But in Lebanon you have Helm, which is an LGBTQ movement that was launched several years ago. You have Meme, which is a movement for lesbian and bisexual women and transgender women, which broke away from Helm because the men kept talking and taking over everything again, shock horror. And in Egypt you have the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights. And in Tunisia, a new LGBTQ movement was recently issued a license which was withdrawn, and then they appealed and they got it back. And in Morocco last year, there was a pride parade. So, unbeknownst to many in the region as well as outside the region, there are so many activists today, and especially after all those revolutions of 2010 and they continue, obviously, that are fighting beyond just that political struggle, like I said, against the Mubarak in the presidential palace, and making it the sexual revolution to include LGBTQ issues as well. So when you go online, there are all these, sadly still anonymous accounts, LGBTQ Arabs, LGBTQ Egypt, Gay Egypt, all of that. Connect with them and ask them, what can I do from where I am right now? And often a lot of it is, again, just amplifying their voice, because they don't have, a lot of people outside the region don't know what they're doing. And one of the things that they used to fight the most against this moral crusade that we have in Egypt right now, this fascist dictator we have called Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who's not from the Muslim Brotherhood, but fascism, whether it's religious or military, is the same. Mm-hmm. He's going through this, he's subjecting us to a moral crusade that lands you in jail if you're anything but a super strict conservative Sunni Muslim man. If you deviate from that in any shape or form, your life is in danger. And so if you're a gay man, you can go to jail for 3 years in Egypt. If you're a belly dancer because you put a video on YouTube, you can go to jail because you show too much cleavage, because you're inciting debauchery. Never mind that we massacre people just for protesting. So in that environment, when an account called Gay Egypt, for example, every week will translate from Arabic into English, gay man arrested in an apartment in Cairo, and his phone was confiscated, and pictures of other men and his account on Grindr was used as evidence against him. That needs to go out into the outside world. That needs to be used to shame our regime for what it's doing to our fellow Egyptians. So I think that this idea of rescuing and saving is so last century and so, just leave it. And also remind people here now. Now, when these groups have rescued and saved people from over there and they bring them to the wonders of over here, the shit that they experience here, whether it's Islamophobia or xenophobia or racism, oh my God. And so they leave homophobia over there to come over here and be told, you know, leave Islam and you're a terrorist and I don't know what. So within the LGBTQ movement in this country, there's a huge problem of racism. There's a huge problem of Islamophobia and xenophobia. So fix it here. This is what I always tell people. We're fixing it over there. We're taking care of over there. Take care of over here. Because, thank you. Because one of the great things that MEAN, this movement for lesbian and bisexual women and the transgender in Lebanon, mentioned in this great book they had called Barid Mistajil that I mentioned in my book, which means express male. It's a collection of oral narratives of the women they work with, was all these women who would say, you know, I left Jordan, you know, I left Lebanon, I left whatever, and I went to the US because I was escaping homophobia, because when I came out, my family disowned me, and I go to the US and I go to Canada, and these people are shits. They're racist shits. And I don't know what to do now, so I'm stuck between homophobia and racism. So fix it here. You know, all the accounts online, all the people of color, in LGBTQ people of color here, when they complain about how many gay men's magazines have white men on the cover, this is not just a passing thing. This is not just, you know, it addresses something really important, which is when you finish the struggle, if you have finished it, as a gay white man, don't forget that there are all these other queer people whose struggle has just begun. And don't be a racist shit. That's my message.
So it's time for us to wrap up. I have one final question, but before I ask my question, a couple of reminders for the audience. Mona and I will be standing in the lobby signing our books. Hers are furnished. She told me this 6 times backstage. Books Inc. is in the back, and they're also, if you can't buy them here, make it out to Literary Row and buy one of them. The Holy Month begins this evening at sunset. Do you have a reflection or a meditation or a dua we can take into it and reflect on the next 30 days?
Well, on Twitter I went on and I wished everyone who observes Ramadan an easy fast and loving gatherings for breaking of the fast, because I think some of my happiest memories of breaking the fast is breaking the fast with my family or breaking the fast with my friends. And there is something about that group dynamic of sharing that special moment together. And I always have this lovely memory of Cairo where I would be late going home for iftar with my family because I'm always late. And it would be me and this taxi driver, and invariably he'll share his food because he knows that, you know, I'm in the car with him, and he'll give me whatever his wife packed for him. And we're racing through the streets, and it's the only time in Cairo where there's no other cars on the streets. So I wish everyone who fasts in any way loving gatherings when they break their fasts.
Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you, you too.